I'm Mark Dresner, and this is the Research Insider, a special interview series featuring experts and leaders at the forefront of market research and consumer insights. The Research Insider is brought to you by the Market Research Event, or TMRE, the largest and most comprehensive conference in the world dedicated to elevating the business value of insights. Joining me today is David Boyle. He's the EVP of Insight at BBC Worldwide. David, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. So we recently concluded the Market Research Event 2015, and there were some, as you noted to me before we sat down today, there were some pretty big words thrown around there. Revolution, a panel on extinction, and such things. Let me ask you, what do you make of all of this with regard to the state of the research field and industry today?
Yeah, some big scary words. And I think if you're in market research, I think there's some serious peril, some serious jeopardy that you're facing. There's challenges from a number of different directions as well. So on the one hand, is new data sources resulting from digital engagement with your products are competing for business leaders' attention from your market research. You've got people who are self-serving, doing research themselves with new tools like SurveyMonkey and Google Forms even. You've got social media analytics, social media data. So the core work that you've been doing for years is being competed against with all these new, supposedly insightful data sources. Everyone's talking about big data or data science. It's a topic of investment and where the future lies. So that's what's getting management's attention. So there are very real risks, I think, for market researchers, for the market research community, and for market research vendors.
How is this manifesting itself in your world at the BBC? Obviously, media is probably the first and hardest hit by all of the disruptive technologies to date. How's it affecting you?
Well, I think just a few years ago, you could look at the Nielsen ratings or their equivalent around the world to understand the audience a show had reached and the performance of a show, which is becoming less and less relevant every single day. So Netflix and Amazon Prime are an increasingly important method of consumption, which is not captured in that data. Other online methods of consumption and engagement are super important. YouTube engagement with the show is a really important way people engage with many shows. It's not captured in the measurement. Piracy, social media engagement and activity, whilst not competing with viewership of the show, is still a really important way people consume aspects of the show and engage with the show. So the ratings, the core currency of the industry, the billion-dollar industry of TV measurement research, as it effectively is becoming less and less important. And we're having to suddenly use all these other data sources, a huge number of additional data sources, if we want to understand the entirety of a show, its audience and its engagement. So a huge challenge from one data source to having these multiple data sources with no agreed currency for how you should use them, or what role they play, or what value they play. Huge unexplored territory.
How do you navigate that? How do you integrate all of these various and sundry ones that are not captured in the Nielsen rating?
Well, I mean, I think the first step is to ask what the business question is that you're trying to solve for. And I think this is key to overcoming the jeopardy and the peril that people face. What is it we're trying to do? Let's get really clear. If you're trying to measure monetized TV consumption, then sure, the Nielsen ratings are the currency, and it's the way you should do it. If you're trying to understand the reach of a brand in broader terms, then that absolutely is not the data that you should be using. It's only part of the puzzle, and you have to define what you mean by brand engagement, and therefore which other data sets you want. If you're trying to understand interest in the show that is not monetized, so who's watching the show or who's interested in the show but is not switching on the channel and watching it. So for example, in some countries we see piracy for some of our shows, which is people who want to watch that show. It's a pretty clear signal of interest in the show, but we don't see that interest reflected in TV ratings. Well, that means we need to find alternate business models by which we get the show to those people in a monetized way. So, you know, those people, that demand, that interest is by definition not in the ratings data. So it depends what business question you're trying to ask, but starting from the business question and saying what data is available in the world to help me answer that business question. What's the best data I should use? Not what data do I have handy? And then solving the business problem carefully. I think that's really the key.
Yeah. How has this, you know, sort of surplus of information and plethora of emerging news sources, and new ones seem to be cropping up every day, how has that affected how you operate as a research function, if I may?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that you need people with skills and time to pull together multiple data sources and to tell a story across that data source. So piracy, research, social media engagement, and TV ratings, for example. In the old world, market researchers would have a product that they worked on, maybe the brand tracker. And that was their area of expertise. They'd report the brand tracker results with great pride, and then they'd run the next brand tracker, which is no longer the world we live in. That person who's run the brand tracker now has to, when they report the results of the brand tracker, take into account consumption, unmonetized consumption, social media engagement. They have to tell a rounded story now about what's going on with that brand, and telling a story data source by data source is no longer useful to us as a business. So that's a slightly different skill set. Now, the question for market researchers is, do people who run brand trackers have the skills, permission, encouragement, and time to do that rounded storytelling instead of being product focused?
Right.
And in my experience, the answer is yes. So with the right encouragement and support, those people can do that. But they're not always given permission, they're not always given time.
Has the change been something that that your department has, the people in your department have adjusted to and adapted to with relative ease, or has it been painful, or somewhere in between? What are the challenges?
I think this stuff's not easy.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's been easy for anybody to adapt to it, least of all me. But no, I think it's really tough. I mean, I think the instinct is, when someone asks a question, is to pull out a relevant data source and to answer the question. But you're only solving part of the puzzle. You're only giving part of the answer now. But you probably don't have all the data sources you need at your fingertips. So if I'm doing research, which is my area of speciality maybe, then I have to suddenly reach out to the measurement person and coordinate delivery of the right data for the problem. I have to reach out to the financial person to check whether the revenues match or tell the same story or a different story. I have to reach out to the social media analytics person to see what's going on in that world. So suddenly I need 5 or 6 people maybe in a room before I can answer the question. And I probably need to have a discussion and a debate to tease out the different stories that are coming from those different data sets. So, I mean, it's a real challenge. It's not just the coordination, and let alone the teasing out of the answer, are really tough. But it can be done, and it must be done. And I think therein lies, for me, a big part of the reason why this peril, this kind of jeopardy that market researchers face, can be overcome, how market research can see a way through it, because market researchers actually, by nature, have the skills necessary to do that. And given, again, permission and time, and given the kind of confidence to say, hang on a minute, I'm not going to just answer this with a brand tracker. I'm going to take a minute and gather the right people and pull the right data together and tell you a more rounded story. Given the confidence to do that and say, let's just delay a moment and get this right. You know, market research can excel and excite people, even in this world with all these crazy new data sets that we need to suddenly learn how to use. You know,
how confident are you in the answers, in the data that you're delivering, in these new data sets themselves? How confident are you in them?
Well, I think it comes down again to what the data set is for, what business problem you're trying to solve. So, you know, social media engagement for a brand is something that's very interesting, but does it tell you that people are going to buy the show? No, it doesn't. Does it tell you that they're going to watch it on when it's broadcast? No, it doesn't. So, what are you trying to do with that data, and making sure you use the data for appropriate appropriate business uses and that you don't kind of misuse that data. So I mean, every data set is probably useful for something, but knowing what it's useful for and knowing what it's not useful for, maybe that's the key question.
Well put. And one last question, and that is, what are your internal clients asking for that remains outside of current capabilities that you would really like to be able to deliver?
That's a good question, isn't it? At the moment, I would say speed of delivery is probably the key thing, because, like I say, data is held by lots of different people who are specialists in that data set. That's the right thing to do. But to tell a story, you need to get lots of people into a room, and that doesn't happen within an hour. So it happens within a few days, and probably raises some questions about the data, which has to go back and be explored. So I would say, at the moment, we take time, a little bit more time to answer questions. But I think that's probably just as we take steps into this new world of bringing multiple data sets together. Because again, I think if we focus on the business problems and we get very, very good at answering particular business problems, so that process can be not automated, but at least streamlined.
Right.
So the first time we sit in a room and say, hang on, social media is saying this, but money's saying this, and TV viewing is saying this, how the hell? The first time, that's a tricky conversation. Once you work out what the rules are and what the relationships are, the second or third time, that's probably a much quicker process.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure that everyone is looking forward to that point, not the least of them you. And I hope you'll come back to us and let us know when you've got that all worked out, so that we can pass on the good news and hopefully some tips for other people who are obviously struggling with the same thing, David.
Well, I'd love to try.
Thanks for coming in today. And that concludes this episode of the Research Insider. If you'd like to know more about the market research event, please visit us online at www.themarketresearchevent.com. Until next time, I'm Mark Dresner, and you've just heard the Insight Scoop.